Hi everyone, and welcome to this lesson where we will talk about how to map ports using Docker. So, as we saw in the previous section, Docker actually uses three different types of networks. Bridges is a network type loaded by default to all containers, and this is a network that creates a bridge between the network interface of the container and the virtual network interface. So, this Ethernet bridge allows the Docker daemon to communicate with a Docker host network device. So a container that connects to another container with an exposed port can communicate with another exposed port. So what you can do is to assign a container port to a port of the host to make the port accessible from outside the container. So it's important to know that you need to expose and publish the port for it to be accessed from outside the Docker host network. For example, if you expose a port, the service on the computer is only accessible from inside the Docker containers. So this feature provides an inner container communication. So the service in the container is accessible from outside the internal network only if you expose and publish the port. So I will bring you some of the network configurations that can be established when we execute container. And the first one is a DNS server, that is what resolves a domain into the IP address of the service running the domain. So this is a way that we move away from the number solution, but we actually use words. For example, google.com also have some particular IP address. However, for people, it's easier to simply go to google.com instead of specifying the IP address. Then you have the DNS search, which is the setup for the DNS search servers. Then you have the -h option, which establishes the host name that will be added as an entry in the etc host file. Then you have the --link option, which allows a container to communicate with other containers without knowing their IP address. The --expose that exposes the container port without publishing that port to the Docker host. You also have the publish option, which lets you to publish the port of a container into the Docker host with a particular format. And that would be all the options plus the net option that we already looked at. And those options pretty much define the way that you can map ports between different containers. So when we add a container to a network, all of the ports are opened for machines that are within the same network and are closed for external connections by default. For example, we should make sure that we don't expose MySQL container ports as they are on the same network. And since they're on the same network, the application container can connect to the network without a problem. However, we won't be able to access MySQL port from outside the network until we publish it. So in fact, the port forwarding is actually the easiest way to expose the services that are running in the containers. So there are two main ways to start a container within port forwarding. The first one is with the -p option, which is publish all, and this usually makes sure that all the ports using the expose statement will be published into the Docker file. So this option would select random free ports on the host server when we have a request for that. The other option is the -p option, which this time is a lowercase, or the --publish. So this option would allow you to explicitly indicate to the Docker which port should be linked to a port in the container. With this option, we should specify the port where we want to listen. The container will fail if that port is currently in use. So one of the ways to do that is with the docker run -p IP command, where you should specify the host port and the container port. The other option is with the specifying only the container port, and the final option is without using IP but specifying host port and container port. So adding the expose keyword inside the Docker file will allow you to indicate that a specific port must be exposed from the image that it builds. So let's go now to the terminal and find out how we can actually define what ports to expose using the ng-inx image. So here I am in my local terminal, and let's do docker run dash dash name docker dash nginx dash p, and here you can specify the host port firstly and then the container port that will be it here. Then let's do dash d nginx, and we got an error because I might have this container already created. Yes, I do have it. So if you get similar error, just make sure that you remove all nginx containers from your Docker device in order to run this example. So you will see that if I now repeat the command, this is actually created. So let's do now docker ps, and you see that we're actually having one process, which is the nginx container, and the host is 0000 8080 going to port 80 with a TCP protocol. And this means that the Docker host that's at port 8080 points to port 80 inside the container. So if I do docker inspect docker nginx, okay, you can see here the network configuration, and if I go up, you see that our host port is 8080. So this is how you can perform a manual mapping using the publish option. Now, if you don't want to be specific but you want to use any type of available port, you can do it with the capital P. So let's remove the nginx container, okay, and I will repeat the same command with the only difference that right now I will not specify any port, and I will do a capital P, which will allow us to publish any type of port within our container for networking. Okay, so now our container is created. So let's again inspect the configuration of that container, and if I go here, you see that now our host port is 55,000, which is a completely random number, and this was just the first available port that was currently in use. If I also do docker ps, you can see that we're pointing from host 55,000 to 80, and this is because we chose not to specify a specific port. This option is quite good as well, because if the specific port that you specify is busy, then trying to specify it will return error in the container. So with the capital P, you actually get the first available port, and there is higher probability chance of your command to be successful. So let's make sure that you remove this container, and that would be everything for this video, guys. Make sure that you stick to the next lecture, where I will show you how to do Docker networks management. Thanks for watching.